I didn't wake up so much as rise, slowly from a place that wasn't sleep, but something heavier, something more like forgetting. The air around me wasn't cold or warm. It was just still, pressed down by the weight of breath that didn't want to keep going. I was lying on a bed of straw, not the clean kind, not the yellow storybook kind, the kind that cuts your skin just for moving, the kind that smells like mold and feet, the kind that whispers you're not the first one to lie here, or the last. Someone to my left snored through a broken nose. To my right, someone whimpered in their sleep. It was hard to tell who was dreaming and who was reliving something worse. We were a choir of regret, and I was just the newest voice. The walls were stone, but they sweated. Condensation ran in thin lines like nervous tears. Some of the moisture smelled like rust. Some smelled like something else. The floor beneath the straw wasn't even. My spine could name every bump I feel. It was like sleeping on bones. No one spoke, not because they were afraid of punishment, but because there was nothing left to say. Here in the dark, under the ground, words were as useless as comfort. Only the rats were brave enough to make noise. I could hear the sound of chains, not dragging, swinging gently, like someone was dreaming of walking again. It was almost beautiful, if you ignored the coughing that followed it. I sat up slowly, my back cracking like old pottery. Everything ached in places I didn't remember having. They didn't give us pillows. They gave us the privilege of continuing. There were no windows, no moonlight, just one small torch near the hallway, flickering like it was afraid to stay lit. It didn't show much, just the outlines of bodies and the damp sheen of a place meant to break people quietly. I didn't know where I was. Not exactly. Somewhere beneath a training school, a ludus, a place where men became legends, or stories told in hushed tones while blood was still fresh on the sand. They said being a gladiator was an honor. They said it brought glory, gold, freedom. They never said anything about the smell, or the straw, or the part of you that started to leave before your body did. My mouth tasted like metal and shame. I didn't remember crying the night before, but the salt was still on my lips. They called it sweat. I knew better. Then came the creak, the one that split the silence. The iron door with a hinge that screamed every time it moved, like it hated letting light in or men out. Boots stepped in, one pair, heavy, measured, not the stomp of a guard, the stroll of someone who had all the time in the world, because everyone inside had none. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The sound of his hand hitting the iron bar was enough. We got up, like roots torn from bad soil, like dead things pretending to remember what it meant to move. I didn't know what time it was. I only knew it had started, and once it starts, there's no stopping it, only surviving. For now. They led us out in single file, chains rattling like wind chimes made by someone who hated music. The corridor was narrow, stone-lined, damp. Our feet slapped against it in a rhythm that didn't feel like marching, more like surrender. I could barely see ahead, but I didn't need to. I just followed the back of the man in front of me, his spine sharp beneath a torn tunic, his shoulder marked by a bruise the shape of yesterday. No one spoke. We were too tired for words, too hungry for questions. The eating room, if you could call it that, was just a hollowed-out chamber with rough benches and no tables. The walls were stained with years of steam and silence. It smelled like boiled grain, burnt onions, and men who'd given up. We sat, not because we were invited to, but because sitting was allowed, and anything allowed felt like mercy. I settled beside a man with no nose. He never blinked, not once. I tried not to look at him. I failed. A bucket came down the line. It sloshed. The smell hit before the contents did. Oiled barley, more water than solid. Floating in it, something green. Maybe a leaf. Maybe not. A ladle, chipped and bent. Dropped a scoop into the wooden bowl in front of me. The splash marked my thigh like it wanted to leave a scar. No spoon, no fork, no hands raised in complaint. Just heads bowed in instinct, as if prayer had been replaced by consumption. The taste? Forgettable. Not because it lacked flavor, but because I refused to give it memory. In a place like this, the less you remembered, the easier it was to chew. Someone coughed across the room. A deep, wet sound. No one turned to look. Acknowledging weakness here was a form of confession. We all had secrets in our lungs. Bread came next. If it could be called bread. It was dense, round, and hard enough to kill a rat. I tapped it against the bench. It made a dull thud, like regret. Still, I bit into it. Still, I chewed. The man beside me ate with both hands. He stared straight ahead, eyes wide and wet. I wasn't sure if he was crying or if that was just the way his face had settled over time. His jaw moved like a machine that didn't want to run, but had no choice. The guards stood at the corners, arms crossed, bored. They weren't watching for fights. They were watching for hope, ... Hope made people stupid. Hope made people act out. And no one here was allowed to act. A boy choked on his gruel. Just once. A short, sharp gasp. He recovered. No one helped him. Helping was a luxury. And luxuries had consequences. I looked down at my bowl. Half full, or half empty, or half poisoned. Did it matter? I kept eating. That was the rule. When the eating stopped, we didn't talk. We just sat, waiting for someone to tell us to move, to stand, to exist again. Between commands, we ceased being men. We were objects, slightly warmed, mildly dangerous, frequently hungry. I used a crust of bread to wipe the bowl clean, licked the rim like it was sacred, and then, like everyone else, I put it back down and tried to forget that I was still hungry, because hunger wasn't a flaw. It was the expected state of things. A rat scurried across the far wall. Nobody flinched. We weren't the top of the food chain here. That rat probably had a better diet, and definitely more freedom. Then the door creaked again. Boots, a shout. We stood. Not because we were full, but because someone decided. We'd had enough. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the yard already smelled like sweat and urgency. The ground was packed dirt, churned and bruised from years of footsteps, and dried blood that no one ever washed away. We stood in rows, barefoot, minded ... The Lanista, our trainer, executioner, priest, stepped into view. His face was made of leather and habit. Scars were expressions used to be. He didn't shout. He just looked, and we moved. First, the stance. Wide feet, bent knees, weight forward. If you leaned back, you weren't ready to fight. If you leaned forward, you weren't ready to survive. Balance. That's what he said. As if that was easy to find. They handed out wooden swords, blunt, chipped, heavy. They weren't weapons. They were reminders. Reminders that real swords came later, when you'd either earned them or were about to die with one in your hand. We paired off. Who you stood across from didn't matter. He could be your friend, your brother, or someone who'd stolen your bread yesterday. Here, everyone was an enemy, or worse, a mirror. The first hit came fast. My shoulder snapped back. The sting traveled up my neck and rang in my ears. He didn't wait for me to recover. He hit again and again. That was the rule. Pain teaches faster than words. I tried to swing back. Too slow. He caught my wrist, twisted. My knee buckled, and I ate the dirt. It tasted like failure. And iron, someone above me laughed. I didn't look up. The Lanista walked by. Pause. ... I braced for a kick, a curse, a lesson. Instead, he nodded ... You got up. That was all he said. But it echoed. We practiced formations next. Standing side by side, shields up. Except we had no shields, just imagination. And bruises where shields should have been. He made us move as one. Like wolves. Like cattle. It was never clear which. A man fell, the one with the crooked spine and missing toe. He didn't cry out. The Lanista didn't stop the drill. The rest of us stepped over him, like he was already gone. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time bends when you're not allowed to think. When your only job is to keep standing, keep swinging, and keep your breath hidden from the man across from you. By midday, my arms shook, not from fear. That part burns out early, but from the weight of expectation. Every movement screamed, if you're not strong, you're dead. If you're not fast, you're forgotten. We ended with endurance drills, running, jumping, falling, and getting back up. Always getting back up, even when your legs felt like melted stone, even when your chest begged for mercy. Mercy wasn't on the training schedule. The final order came with a sneer. Line up, show your hands. Blisters, cuts, splinters deep enough to name. He looked at mine, grunted, "You're not dead yet." He moved on. That was the closest thing to praise I'd heard in days. I collapsed near the wall, breathing like someone trying not to be heard. The man beside me leaned back and whispered. First day? I nodded ... He smiled, without joy. Good. You'll only hate it more tomorrow. My hands throbbed, my chest burned, my mind spun. But I was still here, still counted, still meat worth beating into shape. And tomorrow, they'd do it all again. Not because it made us better, but because some men needed to see you broken. Before they let you bleed, they didn't teach us how to win. They taught us how to perform. Because in the arena, your skill meant nothing. If the crowd didn't care, the rules weren't carved into stone. They were carved into us ... Don't die too quickly, one instructor said. Don't win too cleanly, said another. The crowd wants blood, but not just blood. They want drama, a story, a reason to cheer. And a reason to boo? It wasn't a fight. It was a script, a violent theater, with no lines and real consequences. We were actors in armor, sweating, bleeding, improvising, sometimes with swords, sometimes with screams. Before every match, you were told who you'd be. A Murmillo, a Threx, a Retiarius. Your identity didn't matter. Your role did. And sometimes your role was to die well. They gave you a helmet that barely fit, a shield with cracks, a weapon dull from yesterday's loss. You weren't meant to win. You were meant to fill time, until the real favorite entered. The most important rule? Play to the crowd. Raise your arms when you land a hit. Look up when you're hurt. Scream loud. Fall dramatically. The sand didn't care how you fell, but the crowd did. Once, a man won his fight in seconds. Clean kill. Perfect strike. The crowd booed. He didn't fight again. No one said why. They didn't have to. There was a gesture, thumb to the side, then down. Everyone knew what it meant, but no one knew what it really meant. Because sometimes the emperor spared, sometimes he didn't, and sometimes he let the crowd decide. That was the cruelest rule of all. The louder they roared, the more you were worth. not as a man, as a spectacle. A crowd's love could buy your life. Their silence could erase you. There were no second chances, no rematches, no appeals. The arena didn't believe in fairness, only favor. And favor was fickle, like the wind, like fame, like gods with nothing better to do. Your enemy wasn't just the man across from you. It was the crowd, it was the sand, it was the emperor's raised eyebrow. It was your own trembling knees. They told us to make it look good, to bleed where the audience could see, to fall facing the podium. I once saw a man get stabbed, then twist himself mid-collapse, so the noble seats could see his agony. They cheered. Glory wasn't given. It was sold, one drop of sweat, one scream, one near-death moment at a time. And when they had enough, they moved on to the next, like children with broken toys. We weren't athletes. We weren't warriors. We were content, thrown into sand, so others could forget their hunger, their boredom, their own mortality. The worst part? Sometimes we started to believe it, started to think that applause meant meaning, that pain meant purpose, that maybe, just maybe, we mattered because they watched. But when the crowd left and the arena emptied and the sun dipped behind the walls, all that was left was sand and blood. And you. His real name was long gone. No one remembered it. Maybe he didn't either. They called him Dirt, not as an insult, not exactly, more like an acknowledgement of where he came from and where we were all heading. He was the first person who spoke to me, without orders in his voice. He sat beside me after a training session, back against the wall, arms limp. His skin was cracked from sun and memory. He smelled like old blood and something else, something still alive. First time bleeding? He asked ... I looked down. My palm was split open. I hadn't noticed. I nodded. He grinned. Congratulations. You've been initiated. He was older than the rest. Not ancient, just worn. Like a blade used for too many things. Cutting, digging, hammering. He didn't talk much. But when he did, people listened. Even the ones who pretended not to. Dirt had fought in 12 arenas. 6 cities, 1 rebellion. He had 3 broken ribs, a limp that worsened in the cold, and a tattoo across his back of a falcon with a missing wing. He said it used to mean something. Now it was just decoration. He didn't brag. He warned. Don't win too clean, he told me once. Don't lose too honest. I didn't understand. Not then. But I remembered, because his eyes didn't blink when he said it. In the evenings, when the yard went quiet and the groaning stopped, Dirt would sit by the fence and whisper things to the dark. Names, places, maybe dreams, no one asked. Some things deserve privacy, even in hell. He had a trick. He could disarm a man using only his knee and one hand. I saw him do it twice, once in training, once when a new recruit panicked and lunged at him during bread distribution. That recruit woke up 2 hours later with a missing tooth and a new kind of respect. People thought Dirt was untouchable, but I saw the way his hands shook when no one was looking, how he winced getting up, how he touched the scar near his collarbone, like it still whispered to him at night ... One night, he told me, he used to be a soldier, fought for Rome, killed for it, believed in it ... until one day, Rome stopped believing in him. He didn't say what happened. I didn't ask. Some stories are too tired to be told. He told me, you can survive this place, but you'll leave different. Then he tapped his head. And I don't mean here. He tapped his chest. I mean here. He gave me a piece of cloth to wrap around my sword hand, ripped from his own tunic, sighed, "You fight with your hand, but win with what's behind it." I didn't get it, not yet, but I tied it anyway, and never took it off. Dirt was the kind of man you didn't cry for when he bled, because you assumed he'd stop bleeding when he was ready, and that maybe he'd done it before. One day, he wasn't at the morning drill, or breakfast, or lunch. They said he'd been moved to another city, another fight, but no one saw him go, and no one believed it. Later that week, I found a mark scratched into the wall by my bed, a falcon, missing a wing. Below it, one word, "Fly." After that, I never heard his voice again. But sometimes, when the wind hissed through the training yard, I could almost hear him laughing. And I hope, wherever he was, he wasn't called Dirt anymore. The morning started with drums, not for celebration, not for marching, just rhythm, like the pulse of something ancient. And slightly annoyed, we lined up in the yard, bare feet on cold dust, sun barely over the walls. No one spoke. The weapons cart creaked into view. It wasn't majestic. It wasn't guarded like treasure. It was just a wooden platform, with chipped blades, splintered shafts, and shields that looked like they'd rather retire. The lanista stepped forward. In his hand, a sack ... Inside it, wooden tokens, each marked with a symbol. Sword, trident ... net. Axe, sling, mace, fate, reduced to a drawstring. "You draw, you fight," he said. "No trading, no complaining, and definitely no crying. Especially if you pulled something ridiculous, like the sling ... No one wanted the sling. One by one, we stepped forward, reached into the sack, felt around like it mattered, like fingertips could sense destiny. Some kissed the token before looking. Some didn't look at all, as if surprise softened the blow. The first man drew a trident. He smiled. He was tall, fast, theatrical. A perfect match. The second man pulled a short sword. His eyes narrowed. He'd hoped for something longer. He'd have to get closer now. Then came me. My hand trembled as I reached into the sack. Everything inside felt sharp, even though it wasn't. I pulled out my token. A net. I stared. The lanista stared back. "Congratulations," he said. "Your bait." The net fighter Riciarius, they called it. Fast, light armor. No helmet, no shield, just rope, a trident, and nerves made of bronze. It was a role that required dancing. I didn't dance. They gave me my tools. The net smelled like seaweed and failure. The trident was tall, rusted, and slightly bent at the middle prong. It looked like it had opinions, probably bad ones. I practiced throwing the net. Missed the target 3 times. On the 4th, it bounced back and hit me in the face. Someone chuckled. I didn't. The 5th try wrapped around my own legs. I sat down after that ... on purpose, to hide the defeat. Nearby, another man swung a heavy axe like it was part of his body. His token had made sense. He looked like something that belonged in a storm. I looked like someone who'd gotten lost on laundry day. Some tried to trade weapons, offering bread, favors, whispered secrets. But the lanista watched like a hawk. Anyone caught was reassigned, usually to the front line, with no armor. We kept our fates, even when they didn't fit. By noon, the yard was filled with mock fights. Swords clashed, tridents jabbed, nets fluttered like broken dreams. Some looked ready, others just tried not to cry where others could see. I asked one of the older men, "Why random weapons?" He shrugged ... If you live long enough, they want to see you lose. If you win too often, they start to hope you die funny. In the arena, fairness wasn't the point. Chaos was. A man with a sling could kill a champion. A net could stop a legend. A broken blade could become a miracle. Or a joke. At the end of the day, my hands were raw. My net was torn. My trident still leaned to the left. But I had learned one thing. In this place, it's not about the weapon you hold. It's about what you're willing to become while holding it. And so I practiced, not because I believed I could win, but because I knew someone else had drawn the sword. And sooner or later, we'd both be in the sand. They marched us into the arena at dawn, not to fight, to stand, to feel, to breathe the space where men died, and names lived longer than bodies. This wasn't training. This was orientation. But it felt more like preparation for a funeral hours. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not real silence, but a thick kind, as if the walls were still echoing the screams, and simply choosing not to share them yet. The sand was pale, coarse, and uneven. It had its own texture, like memory underfoot, and it smelled like everything. Blood, ash, sun, regret. I knelt down, scooped a handful. It was warm, too warm, like it had never forgotten the heat of bodies falling into it, as if the ground still carried the last breaths of those who landed face down. Above us, the seats waited. Stone benches, weather-worn and hungry. Birds perched on the ledges, staring at us like they already knew who would be food and who would be decoration. In the center, a small raised platform where judgments were made. Thumbs up, thumbs down, sometimes a nod, sometimes nothing. Sometimes that was worse. Dirt had once told me, if the sand doesn't kill you, the eyes will. I didn't understand what he meant until I stood there, surrounded by silence and sky, and felt 1,000 invisible gazes, piercing my back. Even when the seats were empty, the Lanista made us walk in a circle, then a line, then a crisscross. Our feet left trails like forgotten maps, patterns of fear, loops of hesitation. By the end, we couldn't tell which path was ours. Someone whispered, "This is where the hero died." Someone else said, "No, this is where the coward ran." I didn't ask who they meant, because it didn't matter. In time, every story here belonged to someone else. The smell got stronger the longer we stood. Or maybe we were just noticing less of ourselves. We were merging with the place, with the past, with the dust. We were no longer just trainees. We were future names, to be carved or erased. The sun climbed higher. It didn't burn. It pressed, like a hand on your chest. That didn't want you to speak. They made us kneel, not to pray, to memorize, to let the sand touch our skin, fill our nose, settle into the cuts we hadn't yet earned. My hand trembled, not from fear, from recognition. This place wasn't just an arena. It was a grave, with good lighting. Eventually, we rose. Dust clung to our knees, our elbows, our faces. The Lanista looked at us, like a man surveying livestock. Then he smiled. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll return." And just like that, we were led back into shadow. But the sand stayed behind, watching, waiting, because it remembered. And now, it remembered us too. The night before the first fight was never quiet, not in the way you'd hope. It wasn't filled with screams either. It was filled with the kind of silence that has teeth and breath and memory. I lay on my straw bed, staring at the ceiling, like it might give me a way out. It didn't. It never did. It just leaked. Occasionally, like the walls were crying and had forgotten how to stop. Around me, the others shifted. No one slept. They just waited. One man whispered a prayer, over and over, like it owed him something. Another muttered a name. A woman's, maybe, or a child's, or someone he didn't save. A boy in the corner sat upright, eyes open, hands clenched. He hadn't moved in an hour, maybe more. I wasn't sure if he was meditating or broken. Sometimes they looked the same. Someone nearby was crying, soft, rhythmic. He tried to muffle it, but that only made it louder in the parts of my mind that didn't want to hear anything. The guards outside chuckled. Dice clattered. Laughter echoed, like it had forgotten who it was laughing at. Probably us. I turned over. The straw stabbed my ribs. The chain around my ankle bit my skin just enough to remind me I wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not unless someone carried me out or dragged me. Dirt used to say, "Don't sleep the night before. Your dreams might remind you you're human." He was right, and I couldn't afford to remember what I used to be. I held my breath and listened to my own heartbeat, slow, then fast, then slow again. It had its own rhythm, like it knew something was coming and couldn't decide whether to face it or flee. I imagined the arena, the sand, the sun, the eyes. Mostly the eyes. They don't blink, those eyes. They want to show. A sacrifice, a distraction from their own lives. And I was the offering. I counted the stones in the wall across from me. 27, then again, 31. I'd miscounted. Or maybe they'd moved. Walls can play tricks when fear is louder than fatigue. I thought about what to say if I survived tomorrow. Nothing came. Maybe that was the point. Not every victory deserved a speech. Some just needed breathing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried holding them together. That made it worse. So I pressed them flat against the dirt floor, felt the earth, felt the cold, pretended it was peace. It wasn't, but it fooled me for a minute. Time passed like a wounded animal, crawling, dragging itself toward morning. Each minute stretched, then snapped, like a drumbeat that forgot how to end. When the torchlight outside the cell flickered, we all noticed. Not because it meant something, but because it meant time had moved, and that meant so had death. Closer. I didn't sleep, not really. I just blinked long enough to forget what hope felt like. And when the door creaked open, I was already standing, because lying down had started to feel like surrender. We were marched out like cattle, barefoot, half-blind from the sudden sun, hearts drumming against ribs like they wanted out. No words, no music, just the clank of armor, and the weight of what waited beyond the arch. The arena gate stood ahead. It wasn't tall, wasn't wide, but it felt enormous, like the mouth of a god who only accepted one prayer. Entertain us? As we neared, the sand brightened, golden, almost soft. From a distance, it looked clean. Up close, you could see the stains, the patches that refused to blend, the places where someone bled out, loudly ... The heat hit first, then the light, then the sound. Not cheers ... Breath. Tens of thousands of breaths, held in, waiting. It was the sound of judgment, waiting to choose. Who gets remembered? My trident trembled in my grip. The net hung limp from my arm. It felt like cloth soaked in doubt. The armor was light. Too light. It felt like being naked, with permission. A horn blew, not loud, but final. The gate opened. We walked forward, like men heading toward something holy, which, in a way, we were. This was Rome's cathedral, and blood was the sermon. The sun hit my eyes. For a second, I couldn't see. All I felt was breath. Not mine. There's thousands of eyes, blinking in rhythm, searching for something worth remembering. I hoped I wasn't it. The man next to me whispered, "Don't trip." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because it was the only rule I knew I could keep. Falling too early meant they laughed. Dying too early meant they yawned. Across the arena, our opponents waited, still, composed, like statues with murder behind their eyes. One tapped the ground with his spear, a rhythm, a message. I didn't understand it, but my bones did. The announcer stepped forward. His voice rang across the stone. Words, titles, histories, none of them ours. We weren't introduced. We were presented as distractions, as shadows, as meat. The Emperor raised a hand, didn't wave, didn't smile. Just a single lazy gesture, like flipping a page. In a book he wasn't even reading. The crowd cheered, not wildly ... just enough to say they were ready to feel something, even if it wasn't real, even if it was just us. My foot touched the sand. It was hotter than I expected. Dry, alive. It crunched like it had teeth, like it was hungry, like it was counting. We formed a line. Shields up, nets ready, breath held. This wasn't a fight. Not yet. This was the moment, before the scream. And everyone knew that moment was sacred. And in that moment, with the sun above me, and 1,000 eyes waiting to judge, I realized it didn't matter who I was, only what I'd become in the next 5 minutes. The fight didn't begin with a signal. It began with silence, a moment where everything held its breath, the sun, the sand, me. And then it shattered, like bone under a bad decision. The first strike missed me, barely. It sliced the air beside my cheek and stole a piece of courage as it passed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just existed. Wrongly. The man across from me grinned, not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly, like someone who'd been here before and survived enough times to stop praying. He lunged again. I blocked. Kind of. My trident caught his blade and screamed under the pressure. Metal sings when it's scared, and mine was howling. We circled. Dust kicked up around our feet like nervous ghosts. The crowd leaned in. Thousands of mouths. No words, only noise. Noise that swallowed my thoughts. He struck my arm, not deep, just enough to say, I could have done worse. My blood joined the sand, like it had been waiting there for me ... as if the dust was thirsty, and I'd finally poured something worth drinking. I swung back, sloppy, desperate, the net tangled in his legs. Then mine ... We fell together, like lovers in a nightmare. He landed on top. I smelled his breath. It smelled like iron. And decision. We rolled, dust in our eyes, in our mouths, in our past. I heard the crowd, some cheering, some laughing. I couldn't tell who they wanted to win. I wasn't sure they cared. He pinned me, blade to my throat, eyes calm, hands firm. He could have ended it, but he didn't. He paused ... And in that moment, I moved. Not wisely, not bravely, just enough. My trident came up, found his ribs, slid in. He gasped. So did the crowd. So did I, because it worked. And because it meant something had just changed. That couldn't be undone. He looked at me, not with hate, not with pain, just tired. Then he fell, softly, like someone who'd been waiting for permission. I sat there, over him, shaking, bleeding, alive. I didn't raise my arms, didn't shout, didn't smile. Victory doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it feels like mourning. They dragged him away. The blood stayed behind. It soaked into the sand, vanished without thanks, like it always had. The crowd applauded. Some did, anyway. Others were already looking away. For them, the story had ended. They needed a new one now. I wasn't sure if I'd be in it. They called it glory. They called it honor. But when I stood up, with blood on my hands and no memory of how I got there, all I felt was dust, and how easy it was to disappear into it. After the fight, they didn't speak to me. Not the guards, not the Lanista, not the other fighters. I wasn't ignored, just observed ... like something fragile that had survived by accident. They led me to the feast room, if you could call it that. It wasn't decorated. There were no songs, just a long wooden table, wooden bowls and wooden faces. No celebration, only silence. The food was hot, which meant something: boiled meat, lentils, flat bread, even a cup of wine. It looked like a reward, but it tasted like confession. No one toasted, no one smiled. We ate like prisoners, allowed one meal before sentencing. The clink of spoons was the only conversation, and in that stillness, I could hear my heartbeat, louder than before. Across from me sat a man with 4 scars on his throat. He stared at nothing and chewed with his eyes wide open. To his left, a boy wiped blood from his lip before dipping bread into broth. These were not victors. These were survivors. Who knew the difference? I took a bite. It was good, too good, like it had been made for someone who mattered more than me. Someone who wasn't just lucky to be upright. Halfway through the meal, a door opened behind us ... Boots echoed, slow, measured, like the sound of time approaching. We didn't turn. We didn't need to. You always knew when he entered. The Emperor ... Not a god, not a soldier, not a man who fought like us ... But still, somehow, the most powerful name in the room. Because with a gesture, he could make you eternal or erased. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He walked the length of the table, his eyes sliding across heads, like coins across a map. I didn't know if I should look up or keep my eyes down, so I blinked, and did both badly. He paused behind me ... long enough for my skin to wonder what I'd done wrong. Then his voice, soft, almost lazy. You fought. Well, not bravely, not honorably, just well. The kind of word you give to a blade that didn't break. He moved on, spoke to no one else. The room didn't breathe until the door closed again. When it did, the silence felt heavier, like it had heard him and was thinking about what to do next. After he left, no one congratulated me. No one reached out. But a small bowl was placed beside my plate, filled with honeyed dates. No explanation, no instructions, just sweetness. That didn't belong here. I didn't eat them. Not yet. I stared at them, wondering if they meant I was favored or marked. The feast ended quietly. We left our bowls, our silence, and whatever small part of us had dared to feel important for just a moment. Because in this world, attention was never free, and a look from above could cost you everything. The healing room smelled like vinegar, copper, and quiet defeat. There were no curtains, no prayers, just wooden benches, stone basins, and silence that clung to open wounds. I sat shirtless, holding my side, watching a thin man in stained robes grind herbs into paste with shaking hands. He didn't ask what hurt. He assumed everything. He was right. There were no true healers here, only men who'd seen just enough pain to guess which cuts would fester. and which ones could be ignored. It was triage, not compassion. He poured something onto my arm. It hissed, so did I. "You'll keep the limb," he said. "Probably." Then he wrapped it tight, like he was binding more than skin, like he was holding in something. I wasn't ready to let go. Across the room, someone screamed, not from the cut, from what they remembered of how they got it. Pain is one thing, but memory? That one sticks deeper. Another man, older, slower, sat with his head in his hands. His foot was gone, a bandage wrapped where his life had used to stand. They said he'd be given a coin, one coin, and sent out. To what? Civilians don't cheer for limping legends. I stayed longer than I needed to. Not for the care, for the stillness. Even pain, when predictable, can feel like mercy. Eventually, a voice called from the door, "Draw time." Just that, 2 words, and everyone stood, like their names had already been whispered by fate. We gathered near the courtyard. A clay jar sat on a pedestal. Small wooden tiles inside, each one a number. Each number, a sentence, not in words, but in days. How many until you fight again? Some drew 7, lucky, recovery, time. Others drew 3. Panic flickered behind their eyes. One man drew tomorrow. He didn't react. He just closed his fist around the tile, like he was holding a final breath. My turn came. The clay jar waited. It wasn't large. It didn't hum, but standing before it felt like standing at the edge of something sacred and cruel. I reached in. Fingers brushed past edges, wood on wood. Warm from so many hands before mine, I pulled a tile, turned it over. 4, just a number, but I stared at it like it had teeth. 4 days, to heal. To train, to regret, to hope, to wonder who I'd face, who I might have to kill, or lose to, or both. One man tried to trade, offered food, clothes, even his bunk. The guard took his tile and threw it in the fire. He didn't get another. He just stood there, quietly erased. I kept my tile. Didn't pocket it, didn't hide it. I needed to feel it in my hand, because as long as I held it, it meant I was still in the story, even if only for 4 more pages. 4 days passed, not quickly, not gently. Each one was a bruise, with a different name, stretching, training, bleeding, pretending I was preparing, when really, I was grieving something I hadn't lost yet. The morning came, like they all do. Uninvited, the air tasted like dust and steel, the kind of morning where birds don't sing. Even they knew what the day wanted. I put on my armor, if you can call it that. Straps frayed, leather cracked. One shoulder loose, the other too tight. It didn't protect me, but it hid just enough. And sometimes, that's what armor is for. We stood by the gate, again, like statues rehearsing an ending. No one wanted to see twice. I looked around. Some nodded. Some prayed. I didn't either. There weren't words left. Worth wasting. They opened the gate. Same creek, same sun, same sand. But this time, it wasn't fear in my chest. It was something else. Something heavier. Something quieter. Across from me stood a boy. Couldn't have been more than 17. Eyes too wide. Hands too tight. He was me. 2 months ago. I wanted to lose, not to die, just to stop. We circled, weapons raised, crowd roaring. I saw his foot slip, a crack in the sand. He didn't see it. I could have taken him down, easily, but I stepped back and let him find balance again. He struck first. It glanced off my side, left a red ribbon where nothing sacred lived. I grunted, Not from pain, from the realization that I'd forgotten what it felt like to care if I bled. We clashed, we tangled, we danced like men who didn't want to be here, but had nothing else left. His sword nicked my cheek. I tasted rust. His lips split on my trident. He didn't cry out. He was good, scared, but good. And I was tired of the sand, of the noise, of being alive, in a place where death had more value. I knocked him down, stood over him, breathing hard. Trident raised. The crowd leaned forward. They wanted spectacle, blood, finality. I lowered my weapon and waited. He stood slowly, confused, shaking. We locked eyes, and we understood. There were no winners here, only men who'd survived. One day longer, then someone else. The Emperor stood, raised his hand, paused, then turned his palm outward, thumb sideways. Let the crowd choose. They roared. For who? I couldn't tell, but it didn't matter, because we both walked away, not in triumph, but in truce. That night, I didn't eat, didn't speak. I sat by the torchlight, holding the leather grip of my trident, thinking not of death, but of what came next, when even death lost its teeth. And if you're still here, drifting between thought and sleep, thank you. Not for watching me bleed, but for remembering I was more than a title, a tile, a name scratched into sand. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a monster. I was just a man given a weapon and a crowd trying not to disappear before my own footsteps did. So if you wake tomorrow and the world feels heavy, breathe. Stand, not to fight, but to remember that you're still here. And that matters more than any victory.